You're listening to the Anthem Award-winning podcast from Rutgers Law School, The Power of Attorney. I'm your host and Dean of the Law School, Joanna Bond.
Hi, this is Professor David Knoll, and you're listening to the Power of Attorney podcast from Rutgers Law School. I'm guest hosting this special episode because our usual host, Dean Joanna Bond, is in the guest seat to talk about a new program that Rutgers University has started to provide emergency legal assistance to international students in the Rutgers community. I'm joined now by Dean Bond, along with Professor Randy Mandelbaum, the Associate Dean for Clinical Education in Newark, as well as Jason Hernandez, Director of Rutgers Immigrant Community Assistance Project, or RICAP. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joanna, let me start with you. For people who might not follow the news closely, what is happening with international students at U.S. universities these days?
Unfortunately, David, international students are being targeted for deportation or termination of their student visas, which makes them subject to deportation. And in some cases, international students have been targeted specifically for participating in constitutionally protected activities like protest activities. And of course, there's the well-known example of Mahmoud Khalil, who is a lawful permanent resident in the United States and a Columbia University student activist who was arrested on March 8th by immigration authorities and transferred to a detention facility in Louisiana. And his is just one case. There have been many, many cases of students being picked up by immigration authorities, sometimes in dramatic fashion, and held in custody. And of course, students are terrified as a result. Many don't want to leave the country even for a home visit for fear that they'll be arrested or not allowed back in this country to finish their studies. And so there is this tragic climate of fear for international students that really flies in the face of this country's democratic values and commitment to due process and justice, to the detriment of individual students, but also to the detriment of higher ed as a whole.
Jason, I know you've been working on many of these cases. When we think about the students who are being targeted, are these folks who have engaged in serious misconduct? Have they broken university rules or been charged with crimes or things like that?
So I can't speak for the whole nation, but I can say at Rutgers University, all of the students that had their SEVIS records terminated were all in good standing at the university or graduated successfully from the university. Also, they were in compliance, maintaining compliance with their F1 status, right? So the Code of Federal Regulations outlines certain requirements that every F1 visa holder needs to comply with while they're in the United States. And there is no reason under those regulations why any of these students would have had their status terminated. Also, none of them have, engaged in any activity that would render them removable from the United States. So really, the short answer is no. And so that's really what we're litigating in this case.
Joanna, you mentioned that some of these students appear to be targeted for engaging in lawful activities. What are some examples of that? What are folks doing to draw the attention of the immigration agencies?
Well, unfortunately, in the case of Mahmoud Khalil, he was an activist, a student activist at Columbia, engaged in, as I mentioned, constitutionally protected activity. But specifically in his case, he was engaged in pro-Palestinian protests, which has now, I think, really become the focus of a lot of the targeting of students and student activists in particular. So I think we've seen that at a number of universities for students who were involved in protests or allegedly involved in protest in some cases. In some cases, there was actually no protest activity, but students were targeted nevertheless.
So, Jason, I know you can't talk about specific cases because of privacy concerns, but in general, could you speak to what it's like to be an international student and to have your visa revoked or to be threatened with deportation?
Sure. So I think sort of to draw a distinction between the Mahmoud Khalil case and sort of these cases that revolve around, protected speech, I think part of what a lot of the students across the country and at Rutgers are experiencing is just confusion, because for many of the students who had their SEVIS records terminated, they've not engaged in, protests or published public opinions on social media. And so it was unclear why so many of these records were terminated in SEVIS. And so I think for so many of the students on our campus, there's a fear, right, that they don't know why they've been identified, why they're being targeted. For many of them, right, they did not have to come to the United States to study. They were drawn to Rutgers specifically because it's a really, like nationally renowned or an internationally renowned research institution. And they have relied on sort of the regulations that are issued by the United States that pertain to study in the United States, have complied with those regulations, are engaged with Rutgers and really, research that is of national importance, that is, research related to, cancer and so many other things. But anyway, the point is that they don't know, right, whether they'll be able to continue or whether they won't. And so there's so much uncertainty for them professionally. There's so much uncertainty for them academically. And I'm sure Dean Bond can speak to what the university has done and how this affects the university. But for them, they're just feeling this great sense of uncertainty, and they don't know if we can help them, right? Even as lawyers, right, we can file on their behalves and, say that their Fifth Amendment due process, constitutional protections have been violated, or that the government has violated the Administrative Procedures Act. But whether we will succeed, right, is still uncertain. And so they live every day not knowing whether the last 1, 2, 5 years that they've dedicated to this research or this professional development will mean anything, right? Or whether they'll be able to continue to work after they graduate in the United States on something called optional practical training. So I think it's just really disillusioning and also just spells a lot of uncertainty for their futures generally.
Yeah.
And these students are at risk of being detained or deported, so they're afraid to leave their home. Many of them were working while they were on their F1 visas, and now they cannot. So even things about, paying rent and buying food is an issue.
And Randy, I wonder if you could speak to, sort of the actual experience of what it's like to be one of these students. Are they receiving a fair opportunity to challenge the suspension or the revocation of a visa? Is this something that, you're allowed to go to court to present arguments about?
So, fortunately, and Dean Bond will say more about it, I think, in a minute, the Rutgers students are being given an opportunity, and we did file a lawsuit earlier this week challenging the SEVIS terminations and seeking a temporary restraining order. But so many students around the country are at their wits' end and don't have the opportunity to have, lawyer can't afford legal assistance and are really left, in a state of confusion and fear and without much recourse. Estimates are there's upwards of somewhere between 1,600 and 2,000 students around the country whose visas have been revoked. Some for the political speech issues that Dean Bond has mentioned, but many, for seemingly very random reasons. They are in good standing, and there's nothing in their records that would lead to their, give cause for their termination.
So walk us through it. If you're one of these students, whose visa is, revoked all of a sudden, how do you find out about that? What's that like to be a student in that position?
So, the interesting thing is the students actually are not being notified by the Department of Homeland Security or the State Department. The only way they're finding out is because universities like Rutgers are checking the SEVIS system. Rutgers is checking in many universities twice a day, and they're seeing that the termination has occurred. So there may be students whose universities are not doing that don't even know that they're at risk. But one of the many concerns about what's going on is this lack of notice, that there has been no notification of the fact that their visas have been revoked.
And just for folks who aren't immigration law professionals, what is SEVIS? What's the SEVIS system that you're talking about?
I'm happy to take that question. So when a student applies to study in the United States, right, they go through an application process to obtain a student visa. When they then enter the United States at the port of entry, that's when they're sort of granted their student status. And then the SEVIS system is the mean by which sort of all of the stakeholders track whether a student maintains compliance with the F regulations, and that's all recorded in SEVIS. So every university that is certified to, report on international students attending their institutions has access to SEVIS to report compliance. And then after students graduate, they report their own compliance when they're working on OPT by recording where they're working. And so the SEVIS system really is just like a data management system. But what's so critical about it is that, SEVIS also is the means by which DSOs can publish proof that a student has status through an I-20. And when you terminate someone's record, they don't have the ability to print or produce the proof that someone has a work authorized notation, to work off campus or to do pre-completion OPT or OPT after they graduate. And so, without SEVIS, we can get into the legal details of this, but without SEVIS, right, effectively what the government is seeking to do here is they can say that they haven't terminated student status, but by terminating records in the SEVIS system, they've effectively impaired an F1 student's ability to exercise any of the rights or privileges that are attendant to that status. And so they've basically, in effect, terminated their status, by kneecapping SEVIS.
Yeah, it reminds me of that old Will Smith movie where he wakes up one morning and his credit cards have been canceled and, he's no longer a legal person. And, he's unable to continue his life because his identity has been erased. Is that a totally off base analogy?
No, I would say that there's definitely an analogy to be drawn there.
And just to define terms for listeners, SEVIS stands for Student and Exchange Visitor Program. OPT stands for Optional Practical Training, and the visas that students are getting are primarily the F1 visas.
Mm. So, I want to spend some time talking about how Rutgers is responding to developments. But before we dive into that, I'd really like to sort of try and see things from the other side. I imagine some people listening to this might think, who cares? Studying in the US is a privilege. When you come to the US to study, you're taking the risk that, particularly following a presidential election, immigration policy might change. So, Joanna, do the threats to international students, do they affect the rest of the university? Are they something that anybody but international students should care about?
Yes, absolutely. There's a dramatic effect on the university as a whole. Prospective international students will think twice about coming, unfortunately. And our international students bring a richness of life experience and cultural diversity to the university community. And they enrich the learning that's happening for everyone within the community tremendously. And without them, we will be a culturally impoverished and anemic institution. So there is a truly dramatic effect, not just on the individual students, but on the institution as a whole. And as Randy mentioned, to some extent, this is already happening. International students may be reluctant to leave their dorms. They may be reluctant to leave their apartments, and they're going to be less engaged in community life and university life. And that harms everyone because it really does have a negative impact on the rich experience that is college life or university life. So it matters to all of us.
Mm. I know that Rutgers, like many other universities, is a huge source of research, whether it's into cancer therapies or new technologies or basic science that is used by industries throughout the economy. Are these threats to international students affecting the university's research mission?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we get the best of the best in terms of international students, and they are contributing in significant ways to the research that's happening across this campus. And that includes, as you pointed out, important medical research, breakthroughs that may be delayed because of lack of collaboration and participation from international partners. So it really is a huge impact across the research enterprise, and one that is frankly going to take us a long time to recover from if this continues.
Mm. Well, let's turn to talk about how Rutgers is responding to this threat. Jason and Randy, I know that Rutgers already had a project focused on its immigrant students. Can you tell us about that?
So I'll start. Yes, Rutgers has really been at the forefront of supporting its immigrant and international students since 2017. Rutgers has had a program that you said it in the beginning, David, is called the Rutgers Immigrant Community Assistance Project. We call it RICAP, that has been in existence that supports our international and immigrant students. And Jason has so outstandingly led RICAP since its inception. RICAP provides consultation to any Rutgers student who feels as if they want to consult with an immigration attorney. And for some, RICAP also provides direct representation and does countless community education events on all of its campuses, so that Rutgers students, faculty, and staff are as educated as they can be about what are the rights of our community, of our immigrant and international community. And Jason, I don't know if you want to add anything, but Jason has truly been the fearless leader of RICAP since 2017.
So, I mean, that's a great description of RICAP. I'll just say, I guess the value add of RICAP that I've observed in the time that I've been here is that, RICAP has partnered with the Center for Immigrant Justice around, immigrant rights, things like driver's licenses for the immigrant community, vocational licenses, regardless of lawful presence when there was like a healthcare worker crisis during COVID. And even, sort of having this program exists as it has, we're just so aware of sort of these other factors that affect students on campus, right, that relate to immigration status and access to healthcare, immigration status and ability to travel, right, to work in various fields. And so it's been really great, I guess, just having had this time sort of as we've now entered into a second sort of Trump administration where RICAP is plugged into so many parts of the university and can mobilize technical assistance to faculty and staff on like a really quick basis.
Jason, can you give us a sense of how many folks RICAP has provided assistance to? What are we talking 5 or 10 students, every now and then?
So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I mean, it's well over 600 students that have received consultations, probably 700 at this point. And then we've represented over 300, and I want to say like 350 students in direct representation. And then most recently, the federal litigation that we filed with the newly formed rapid response team, which I'm sure we'll talk about shortly.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So in addition to the work that RICAP was already doing, the law school, in conjunction with the university, has started a new rapid response project. Joanna, how did you get the idea for this project, or how did the school get the idea for this project, and what needs does it fulfill?
Well, it really came out of a conversation in which I was in a meeting with the president and asked the president, because I was hearing about all of these situations with other universities where students were being pulled off the street or having their SEVIS records terminated without any notice to them. And I knew that it was only a matter of time before this was going to directly impact Rutgers students. And so in that conversation with the president, I said, look, it would be great if we could be ready, if we could be prepared to immediately take up these cases for students. And the next day, I got a call from John Farmer, who's our general counsel. And he said, let's talk about this. And so we began a conversation about what that might look like, including a hotline number that students could reach out to get immediate relief and representation potentially. And so then my next call was to Randy, because she is the director of our clinical program and is amazing. And she said, yes, we can do this. Let's figure it out, which was phenomenal. So then we put forward a plan to form the rapid response team, which really consists of attorneys who are standing at the ready to help our students should they encounter immigration authorities. And so together we put together a proposal, brought it to the president's office, and received significant support from the president's office. So I'm happy to say that Rutgers really has a shared commitment to its students, period, but in this moment to its international students in particular. And so there was a lot of support for this proposal. And our team got it off the ground overnight. Randy and Jason can talk a little bit more about the attorneys involved, but these are folks who are so committed to our students and who are subject matter experts and who could step in immediately and provide legal services to students in need. So I'm so proud to be at Rutgers, at an institution that has invested heavily in protecting its students in this way. And I really think this is an excellent project, and it's an excellent project due in large part to the people that we have involved. And Randy and Jason are living examples of that. So it was really a great experience to work with the people that I worked with to get it started, and now it's off and running. And as you can see, there's already been a lawsuit filed. So really immediate action in circumstances that warranted it.
And just to be clear, this is something that's available to everyone in the Rutgers community. Is that right?
It's available to students across the board. And so it doesn't have to be a law student. It could be any Rutgers student who is facing some of these particular challenges.
And the rapid response line that you talked about, that's a 24/7 hotline that students can call. Is that right?
That's correct.
For emergencies, not right. For any legal needs that you may have, but for people who encounter immigration emergencies.
Yes. And that's an important clarification, because we really do want to save that hotline number for students who are in an emergency situation to reach out for help.
Jason, when should people be contacting this emergency hotline? What kind of problems is it there for?
The emergency hotline is specifically for students who are engaged in an enforcement encounter. So maybe they've been stopped by ICE or they're facing imminent arrest and deportation. That's really the specific circumstance when students should use that number. I highly recommend students pre-program that number into their phone and have it at the ready if they need it. Or make sure that they have an emergency contact that knows the plan to contact that number immediately. We have, great attorneys that are available 24/7 that will rush, right? You can file an emergency petition in district court anytime. They'll file to preserve jurisdiction and, file habeas if you have to be released from detention. And so that's sort of the immediate action. If there's a situation, right, with these SEVIS terminations where students were, having personal emergencies where their SEVIS record was terminated, but they were not facing immediate enforcement, then in that situation, the best thing to do is to call RICAP's contact line, which is available on our website and has been circulated, I'm sure, in very many emails now. And we will get back in touch with you, usually within 48 business hours, but really sooner than that in most cases. And we can address your issues that way.
If I could just add something about the rapid response team. I mean, it's just been so inspiring and heartwarming to me in these pretty bleak times that, we have both the support of our dean but also of the president, and that my colleagues, Jason included, really stepped up when we needed literally immediate emergency legal services. And I just want to say that those colleagues are Jessica Rofe, who is the director of our Constitutional Rights Clinic, and two wonderful detention defense attorneys from our Immigrant Rights Clinic, Lena Canuela and Pina Cirillo. And so our plan is that team will be in place until we can hire a rapid response attorney to be on staff full time with RICAP, but obviously that wasn't going to happen overnight. And Joanna and everyone saw the need of having somebody in place immediately. And so it's just been, truly inspiring. And to quote Joanna, really, makes me proud to be a part of Rutgers.
So this project has been going for a couple of weeks now. Jason, what has the rapid response team done so far?
So fortunately, we haven't had to respond to any imminent ICE enforcement actions. But since the rapid response team was created, we did learn that over a dozen students enrolled at Rutgers or recent grads from Rutgers had their SEVIS records terminated. I think one of the things that's so great about having RICAP in place and then having this rapid response team is that we have such a strong understanding of our students at this point, and we are immigration experts, but it positioned us to really evaluate what was happening here and to reach out to other partners like the ACLU of New Jersey and Gibbons and figure out like what could be our response. Originally, we thought we would operate within the immigration system, perhaps seeking reinstatement for these students. But then it became really clear that this does involve like non-immigrants or people from outside the US, but it just involves immigrants. What we're really talking about here is the Constitution of the United States and the Administrative Procedures Act, and holding the government to account when they don't abide by the Constitution or follow the regulations that they set forth, for themselves, and don't follow the regulations, that they're bound by. And so in this case, what we've really done is we filed litigation in district court, basically challenging the termination of these SEVIS records in violation of, the Fifth Amendment due process clause, because, you did ask, like, are students able to mount a response? And so within the system, the response to having your SEVIS record terminated, usually ICE does not terminate your record. So this is an aberration in the first instance. Usually it's terminated by your school when they identify a fact that puts you out of compliance. But then you must seek reinstatement, but you have to admit a violation and then your status is reinstated discretionarily. There is no redress or appeal of having your SEVIS record terminated. And so all of these students were just, doing their work as they were doing every day for however many years, and just found out that this outcome had happened and had no chance to provide a response or anything. And so we've had to file in district court to basically challenge that. Also, the Administrative Procedures Act just doesn't permit for this sort of termination. And so this is just a violation of the Accardi doctrine, but also just like an unlawful pattern of practice of putting thousands of students across the country out of status, not in compliance with regulations set forth by, the executive branch. And so really, like, this does involve immigrants, but these are much larger issues that I think, we're talking about protections that affect any stakeholder that's in the United States. And, if these individuals were detained as a result of this, right, as a result of these SEVIS record terminations, they would lose their freedom without even having had this opportunity of redress. And so that would be, also a violation of Fifth Amendment due process. And so there are a lot of issues on the table here that are wrapped in immigration matters, but really they're core principles of like what are American values and holding the government, to basically account, right, for the laws that we have, in our country. Right? This is a nation of laws, as we've heard so often lately.
So if I understand correctly, the way it used to work is if, someone lost their eligibility for a visa, the university would tell them about that. They'd have a chance to respond. After hearing from the student, maybe the university would go in and say, look, this person is no longer eligible for a visa. And what we're seeing today, if I understand correctly, is government agencies just going into that database and taking over the function that universities used to play and saying, really by the thousands, we're revoking these visas or we're suspending these visas. Is that right?
That's correct. There would be a back and forth with the university, and then the university would be required, right? If there is a violation, the universities are required to report the violation, but they secure documentation from the student and have to upload that documentation into the system to support that finding. Here, right, there have just been annotations that students have, failed. Initially, it said failed to maintain status, criminal background check / visa revocation. And that's boilerplate language that immediately just having two options in that option makes it unclear whether or not there's criminal history or there's some other immigration flag on their case. And of the students that were affected, it was a mixed bag. So that's, it doesn't really give you any information that you could even mount a defense. And even those notations changed from the beginning of this event happening to the point that we filed litigation. So there's definitely been just procedural irregularities throughout this whole process. So what you say is exactly what is happening. And typically SEVP does not have like a function where they institute changes. There's just general maintenance of the system.
So, Joanna, you talked a little bit about how the project at Rutgers got started, and of course, this is only something for Rutgers students, right? It's limited to our university community. But as we were discussing, students across the nation are facing these kinds of threats, and it's not just in New Jersey that students are having visas terminated or that they're being threatened with deportation, but really nationwide. Is the project at Rutgers something that other universities could adopt? Is this a model for other institutions?
I think so. I think other institutions could make the decision to replicate this model. I think it's a good model. I think it's already proven to be protective of our students based on the lawsuit that was recently filed. And hopefully there's a positive result in that case. But I do think that other universities could adopt this rapid response model. And I think it really fulfills a need that exists out there. And I'm not sure that other universities have taken that approach yet, but I believe it is a model that could be used elsewhere.
I have been getting queries from people at schools around the nation who want to know exactly what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Yeah. Just following the news, I've been struck by the extent to which, as they respond to these threats, universities are really going it alone, right? Each of them, seems to be trying to figure out how best to respond to these problems at the level of a specific university, or sometimes even at specific schools within universities, which is really puzzling to me. Joanna, do you think there's a role for greater coordination on these kinds of issues? Is there a reason for universities to be doing this one by one rather than protecting their collective interests?
I think it makes sense to team up and protect collective interests, absolutely. But I do think that part of the explanation is that institutions of higher ed are struggling to respond to crises on a weekly basis. And so I think that explains part of this. The lack of coordination and collaboration is simply a product of leaders trying to stay ahead of what is coming down the pike. And last night, for example, we had another executive order about accreditation and specifically targeting accreditors, the ABA in particular, that is the body that accredits law schools. So I think that's just one example, but there are many, many issues that are raised really on a weekly basis that require some kind of thoughtful response from universities. And so some of it is just leaders trying to keep their heads above water. But that said, this is a real opportunity for collaboration. And I think that one thing that would be helpful is information sharing across networks. And so as we venture into this litigation, there may be things that are relevant and shareable in other jurisdictions. And so I think that one of the things that RICAP has done is it has an incredible network of community organizations that it's worked with. And so sharing information within those communities and also across institutions of higher ed, I think there are real possibilities there that are at this point untapped, but who knows? Maybe we'll get better at this as time goes on.
I think there are a few universities that have something like RICAP, the UC system does, and a few others. And, that started in the first Trump administration. And I know they are connected. And so that's good. There also is something called the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration that again started during the Trump administration that does try to coordinate some of the efforts. But to Joanna's point, it is also just really hard to keep up. I mean, even just in the immigration space, it's pretty much daily that there's something new, new executive order, new policy, new something coming down that we're all trying to respond to.
I think back just to the days of DACA and how there was an effort for universities to collaborate on, can we do, DACA renewal events for all of our students across New Jersey? And it felt like there was potential there, but the rapid response team, I think, reveals sort of where the real value in communication across institutions is, because I cannot tell you how many students have reached out to us when they've learned about Rutgers pursuing litigation for their students, asking if they could join our litigation. And so to Joanna's point, we've been reaching out to all of our partners across the country who are bringing litigation in different parts of the country or bringing litigation, in New York or in New Jersey. And we do try to help match students that we can't serve. But I think this is an example where, in a future scenario, we could have a joint response where we seek relief for all of these students in New Jersey that are similarly situated. But it would just take some planning to get all of that data collected and prepare all those litigants. And so there were limitations this time around, but I think it does sort of like seed this idea that there could be similarly situated students across universities that have claims that could be filed together, depending on what the administration does next.
Well, this has been a really informative discussion of what's going on in universities and what Rutgers is doing to protect its students. I wanted to close by bringing it back to the students. Randy, if you had a message for students who are being impacted by these policies, what would it be? And then I'll put the same question to Jason.
It's hard because we're really living in some lawless times. But I think I would first tell them to breathe and don't panic, to try to plan and gather their documents, learn their rights, and identify an attorney. And, if you're at Rutgers, you're fortunate that we know that RICAP, it can be that attorney. But for anyone, I think to try to identify some legal assistance, and to just try to think through a plan if the worst case scenario happens, but hopefully it won't.
Jason, anything to add?
I'm not sure when this is airing, but if, on April 30th, we're hosting like a university-wide community information session or, conversation around issues that are affecting non-citizen students at the university. And so I hope that any students, faculty, or staff that hear this will attend that event for more information. I think, I echo what Randy said about not panicking. There's so much information being circulated. Some of it's accurate, some of it's, built on some accuracies, and some of it's false. And so just to make sure to identify, where your resources are and where you can get accurate information, and to just, take it one step at a time.
Well, thank you all for the discussion. This has been really enlightening. And thank you also for the work that you're doing on behalf of our students.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Power of Attorney is a production of Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations just minutes from New York City and Philadelphia, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal, small campus experience. Learn more today by visiting us at law.rutgers.edu.